thank you all for coming here so early in the morning, at least for us. This is the ArcGIS Enterprise in the Azure Cloud session. My name is David Cordes, and my co-presenter, or the guy actually who's doing most of the presenting, is Nick Shampur. One of the things I see people frantically doing is trying to take pictures of the slides. I just want to let you know the slides are available. You can take a picture of this slide if you want. I have a short link, the bit.ly link, and all the slides are available for viewing from this location. You can also always contact either of us through email address. You have some deep troubleshooting issue, we may not be the best people to talk to. But if you just have a question or you want to know how something works or what, you want to share something awesome that you've done, definitely send us an email. Wait for everybody to get that information down before I go to the next slide. And I also have some cards up here too if you want to pick up a card at the end of the session. So you can contact me. Okay. Before we get started, I'll just explain who we are. We both work on the development team. We're the team that builds the software. So what we'd like to do is understand a little bit more about your experience. So on the first thing, I'm trying to understand what your role is in your organization. I expect several of you can raise your hand on multiple of these. That's perfectly fine. I guess the first thing is, how many of you would have some kind of development responsibility, writing code? This is the Developer Summit, so I expect to see quite a few hands. How many of you perform some kind of IT function as well? And that would include DevOps type stuff, yeah, okay. And how many would you also consider yourself like a GIS analyst of some sort? Yep, okay. And how many of you are in some kind of management role? Okay, sounds good. I think a lot of you are underpaid probably, given how many roles you fill. Let me say that. The next thing I want to do is get some idea of your IT exposure. There's being made responsible for IT, which is one thing, and then there's like, well, how much experience do you really have doing that? What I like to do is on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 means, yeah, I know a little bit about it. I'm just enough to be dangerous. And then going up to 5. 5 means, I'm pretty sophisticated with this kind of stuff. And what I'll have you do is, one is everybody raise their hand on 1, and then as I go to 2, 3, 4, 5, we'll start lowering our hands. So this is the stretch in the morning. So everybody's a 1. How many of you guys would consider yourselves a 2? Okay, 3, 4, 5. I mean, that's kind of what I would expect. Thank you, guys. Obviously, on the cloud, a lot of us are having to perform IT roles without having an IT background. I guess the other thing is, obviously, you're all interested in the Azure cloud to some degree, but how many of you actually use the Azure cloud for some function? Okay, good percent of you. And then how many of you have used Esri's Azure Cloud Builder tool? Okay, I think a lot of you guys are going to see something really exciting today. So why don't we just get started? I'm just going to throw this in, a few initial slides to level set us. I think the first thing is, when you hear the cloud, everybody talks about the cloud, and you can have 2 people talking about the cloud, talking about completely different things. My mom knows that Facebook is in the cloud, and other people will say the cloud is, it can be something on premises that you control. Other people will say, no, it's a public cloud, and there's all kinds of distinctions. What we're going to talk about here is infrastructure as a service. That's what we mean by this cloud in this session. And that means your servers, your machines, aren't running in your infrastructure. They're running in someone else's. In this case, probably Azure, but obviously Amazon, Google, others have clouds as well. Now, I think the first thing, just to give you some level setting, is ArcGIS Server, we support every cloud provider. Our feeling is we already make our software work we supported every customer's environment. Doesn't matter how strange your IT environment is, our software should work there, hopefully, assuming you use it as documented. Same thing's true with using all these different cloud providers. So whether you're using, Aliyun, you're using IBM Cloud, Rackspace, you can call our support staff and we'll help you. We may not have expertise on Rackspace, but we know our software and we'll be able to help you with that aspect of it. Now, then why do we have special sessions just for Amazon and Azure? And that's because we have special tooling specifically for Azure and Amazon. On those platforms, our approach has been, we know a lot of our customers are using this, and so we can create special tooling to make the experience even easier than it is on premises. So we'll talk about some of that special tooling today. The other thing that we do with our special tooling, people sometimes ask us, well, should I use Azure or Amazon? And my answer is yes. Because we are agnostic when it comes to Amazon or Azure. We want to support both of them, take advantage of the functionality that they have, and we want you to pick whichever cloud is natural for you. We don't want to force you into some cloud provider that you otherwise wouldn't use simply because you think Esri supports it better. Our approach on all of our stuff, and we've done sessions over the years that have shown that basically the same functionality is available on both. So I want to go into ArcGIS Enterprise. Probably a lot of you have heard this term at the Dev Summit so far. Yeah. Now I'm not sure how many of you have gotten an explanation for it. I'm going to give you a conceptual overview of what I mean by ArcGIS Enterprise. I want to get the core key concepts. We're not even going to get into the deeper level stuff immediately, but at least understand what it is so that we all understand it, because the rest of this session is going to be talking about these concepts, and so it's good to understand these terms. I'm going to first explain what's a base deployment, and then I'm going to talk about the other deployments that build off of that base deployment, specifically GeoAnalytics, GeoEvent, Image Server, and the GIS Server Deployment. So the first thing I want to talk about is the base deployment. The base deployment, the whole goal of the deployment is to give you a portal, essentially, a fully functional portal that works much like it does online, in ArcGIS Online. And for those who don't know about Portal is about collaboration and sharing of your GIS content. You can upload content directly, you can upload a shapefile, file geodatabase. You can also share services, you can share your ArcGIS server services, and you can also do a bunch of other things, such as build applications automatically through a wizard-like experience. You can also do analysis. Now, Portal by itself needs some functionality to power it. So when you want to upload your shapefile and have it served out live on the internet, well, we have a product for that. That's ArcGIS Server. When the ArcGIS Server is specifically helping the portal do those things, we call it a hosting server. That server's purpose isn't necessarily to serve up generic map services, though it can. It's primarily to help serve out the things that the portal needs to make it successful. Now, when you're going to be uploading content and serving it out live, if you load a shapefile and you want to serve it out as a feature service through ArcGIS Server, you need some place to store that, and that's our ArcGIS data store. It stores your live content, your 3D tiles, and your spatiotemporal data. The spatiotemporal data is obviously, it's spatial and it has a time component. Usually it comes from GeoEvent. Sometimes it comes from GeoAnalytics. So that's our base deployment. Everybody with me so far? Everybody looks like they're nodding their heads. Good. And again, like, this does not necessarily imply a network deployment. Portal doesn't need to be on a separate machine. You can put Portal and hosting server on the same machine. We're just implying the logical, conceptual components. Now, if you want to get more interesting, let's talk about the GeoAnalytics deployment. Like I said a second ago, the GeoAnalytics deployment needs the base deployment. Now, but let me tell you what the GeoAnalytics deployment does. Essentially, it does multi-threaded analysis on vector data. So multi-threaded is the term I'd use here at the Developer Summit because so many of you are developers. But basically, it can break up work and have a bunch of workers work on it at the same time and come up with an answer faster. That's what GeoAnalytics is all about. Now, one of the things I often get is, well, why do I need a base deployment? Why isn't GeoAnalytics by itself ready to do everything it needs to do? And so what I've tried to do on the right side of this slide is explain what these different components in the base deployment, what value they add to GeoAnalytics. So the first thing is, all of our clients, they don't need to be told, you don't have to enter into a client like Pro, a URL to your GeoAnalytics server. Pro already knows and has to use and work with a portal. And so when Pro starts up, for instance, it automatically knows about your GeoAnalytics server because it's registered with Portal. So automatically you get discovery of your GeoAnalytics deployment. The next thing is the hosting server can serve out the results. So you run all this analysis, for 30 minutes, come up with a great result, and you want to serve it out as a feature service so people can view your results. Well, that's what the hosting server does, right? It's providing those capabilities. And then the ArcGIS data store, it has the spatial temporal data store. And the spatial temporal data store is designed to scale with large amounts of data. So if your multi-threaded analysis has a huge result, well, great, it's going to be able to be served quickly and efficiently and highly available if you're using the spatial temporal data store as documented. So that's the GeoAnalytics deployment. GeoEvent, we of course have had GeoEvent Server for a while, and it's a key part of the deployments for ArcGIS Enterprise. So for those who've never heard of it, it processes real-time data. And what do we mean by real-time data? You might have sensors, you might have cars, you might have tractors, whatever, satellites that are just streaming in live data. And GeoEvent can process that incoming live data and then output it to some other format. Now, again, why do we have the base deployment in here? Well, Portal provides the authentication for GeoEvent. Now, one of the things you notice often is when you get multiple systems, one of the most annoying things as a user is you have to be prompted multiple times for logins. You're like, oh, come on, I just logged in here, why do I have to log in here? Well, with all of these deployments, you log in once. You log into your portal, you're automatically going to be logged into your GeoEvent server. No additional logins, a single sign-on experience for ArcGIS Enterprise. ArcGIS Server can serve the historical records. Like you've gotten all these feeds, you're doing processing on the fly, maybe making decisions on the fly. But maybe you want to go back and analyze that. Well, the hosting server has the ability to do some spatial analysis and be able to serve out those features. And then finally, the ArcGIS data store, the output from the GeoEvent analysis is stored, in most cases, in the spatial temporal data store. So, because it can handle that high volume of data. It can do lots of writes, and it can handle large amounts of data. The image server deployment, we've obviously had the image server for a while. It serves, it analyzes raster data in a multi-threaded way. You probably heard at 10.5, we added raster analytics. Raster analytics does let you do that multi-threaded analysis on rasters. It can break up your data into pieces and have a bunch of workers work at the same time on that data. It's very exciting. And of course, it's going to work with your base deployment. Your portal is going to be able to discover the image server and share that information out so that when you work with it in clients that connect to a portal, they'll automatically know about the image server and provide those capabilities. The final one is the GIS Server Deployment. This is probably, if you've used ArcGIS Server in the past, this is what you've used, right? You have an ArcGIS Server, it has map services on it, it has geocoding services, geoprocessing services. And of course, you can use it standalone, right? You don't have to use it with a base deployment. But what you get out of that when you work with a base deployment is you get that single sign-on experience if you've federated, as we call it, with the base deployment, so that users don't have to sign on multiple times. And then users can discover your map services. I think a lot of you have been using our software for a while. Probably your discovery mechanism for a long time with ArcGIS Server was the REST services directory. Like you have this endpoint, and you're like, hey, users, go browse through that and see if you can find the service you want. And that was the best you pretty much could do. With Portal, you can now do searching. You can put descriptions and terms and tags, and it's a modern search experience, which is what people are looking for. We've been a victim of our own success. Like we have people, ArcGIS Server has been really useful, and people have created lots of services. It's no longer 3 services that you search through. It's now hundreds of services throughout your organization that you want to be able to find. And so Portal provides a lot of value in that case. Now, some considerations when you actually implement this. The deployments can be what I would call consolidated. This isn't a term that we always use, but you can put several components on the same machine, especially that base deployment. You put the hosting server and the portal and the relational data store all on one machine, and there won't be a problem. Or you can explode it, especially if you think you're going to get a high volume and you're like, I need to scale. You might break those components out into multiple machines. It is your choice, And that's probably beyond the next minute that I have to explain that. I'd be happy to talk over afterwards if you're interested. All these deployments can be made highly available. So high availability is really important for a lot of these deployments. High availability is an option that you should definitely consider depending on the requirements of your organization. And then all these deployments can be scaled based on need. So now one of the challenges when you look at all these deployments, you're like, wow, that makes it a little bit more complex. Like there's more components in my system. Well, when you do something that provides more value, there usually is something. One of the things that you'll see in the rest of the session is that we've made this really easy on Azure. Like I think the people who are working on premises will be jealous of what you can do on Azure and how easily you can do it. Because you're going to be able to spin up all these deployments with just a few clicks and a few pieces of input. So to show you that, I'll hand it over to Nick.
Thanks, David. So what I'm hoping to do over the next 30 to 45 minutes is to be able to answer 3 questions or give you 3 takeaways, which is the why, what, and how you can use our deployment tools for Azure. After that, I'll give you a quick sneak peek of what's coming in our future releases, and then we'll stop for some question and answers. So earlier we had a quick survey in terms of what's your exposure to IT and your level of expertise. One of the things with infrastructure as a service is there's a lot of terminology, and depending on your exposure to infrastructure as a service, you might be familiar with it, or maybe you're not. Maybe you're typically a developer background with not as much experience in IT. So these are just some of the terms that are commonly seen in infrastructure as a service. So it really is our attempt to abstract all of this away from you. So how do we do that? It's essentially 2 things. One is we provide ready-to-use virtual machine images, and we make this available through the Azure Marketplace. So it is available in all of the public Azure regions, so 34 regions across the globe, with 4 in preview. So automatically, as regions come on board and Microsoft provisions more data centers and regions, our images are automatically available. It is also available in the US GovCloud, codenamed Fairfax. So that's part A of the strategy, which is to make the software easily accessible and available to you. The second part is to make it easy for you to deploy and manage these ArcGIS server installations or deployments. And for that, we provide deployment tools, and this is in the form of Cloud Builder. So quick breeze through of some screenshots of the Azure Marketplace. If you visit the revised Azure Marketplace, the new one, and search for Esri or ArcGIS or ArcGIS Enterprise, you'll find our marketplace listing. You'll be able to read about it. You'll be able to find links to Cloud Builder from there and go from there. You can also do the same within the Azure portal experience and find our previous released versions and the latest version as well. One thing I'd like to call out is that these images are still operate in a bring your own license fashion. So you would still be working with Esri customer support and your account representatives to acquire licenses. So the images come with the software. You're still expected to work with through your regular means to acquire your licenses. What is Cloud Builder? Cloud Builder is a desktop application for Windows. It provides a wizard-driven experience for you to achieve your deployment workflows, gives you sophisticated options for configuring ArcGIS data stores and different database options. It also takes advantage of configuring some of the Azure or cloud-native features. As our server evolves and integrates more with cloud features, the Azure Cloud Builder provides an experience where you'll be able to wire those features up within Cloud Builder itself. These include things like the Azure Storage, the Azure Key Vault, Blob Storage, and Data Lake. And you'll see some of this in my demo in a little bit. I'll just build on some of the discussion that David already had and some of the base that he laid. So we mentioned about the base deployment and the different specialized servers and the different licenses that you apply. Translating this to Cloud Builder, these map to individual sites. So each deployment is an ArcGIS server site. So central to this is your portal for ArcGIS and its hosting server. So that would be your hosting server site, which is the base. In addition to that, you can have one or more ArcGIS server sites specialized for the role that you desire. So we went through the image server, the GeoEvent, the GeoAnalytics, the generic ArcGIS server site. All of these can be deployed through Cloud Builder as well. And then depending on its purpose, you'll typically want to buddy that with the data store of your choice. It could be the ArcGIS relational data store, the spatiotemporal data store, or your tilecast data store, or could be big data file shares residing in Azure storage or on file share machines. Could additionally work with generic non-Esri data store such as SQL Azure or SQL Server on a virtual machine. David touched upon this a few minutes ago. Cloud Builder allows you to deploy everything on a single machine, or you can spread it out on a number of machines, depending on the number of licenses, cores you have, and also your budget and your needs. You have the ArcGIS Enterprise comes with many components that you're familiar with, the portal for ArcGIS, ArcGIS Server, and then the ArcGIS Data Store. You have the option of putting them all in one, on a single machine in a single tier, or you can break it up into different machines and have multiple tiers for this. And you'll see how you can achieve this deployment pattern through Cloud Builder. So when you do split it up into multiple tiers, you have both the option of splitting it up to multiple tiers and also the ability to have many machines per tier. This will let you get the elasticity and scale to meet your demands. So what would something like this look like if I had a multi-tier site deployment? Every site has a load balancer associated with it. That load balancer has a public IP address associated with it, and typically has a DNS name associated with it as well. And this receives traffic on HTTP and HTTPS friendly ports, port 80 and 443. The first tier is a web proxy or reverse proxy tier, which runs IIS, and where its responsibility in life is to provide that single application endpoint for you to access your portal, your server, and all your services. One thing you'll be able to make out from this architecture is that each of the tiers are actually separated by a load balancer. And the reason for that is as machines come and go within each tier, that's abstracted by the fact that there's a load balancer in front of it. So the hosting server is behind a load balancer and listens on the ArcGIS server ports, 6080, 6443. The portal for ArcGIS listens on 7080 and 7443. And then stepping back another tier, you'll actually see you could have your ArcGIS data store for relational. And again, you can have a primary and a standby machine for it. You can also have the ArcGIS data store for spatiotemporal, and you can scale that out to many machines. There is also a file share machine which stores the ArcGIS server config store and the content store. This is needed for ArcGIS server. And the dotted rectangle around it represents the virtual network to which these machines belong to. You could optionally choose to use cloud storage to store the ArcGIS server config store and the content store. This will leverage Azure storage for blobs and tables to store this, store the config and content store. Now that we've seen sort of the why and the what, let's see how you actually do it. The first step is getting started. So how does one get started? First step is you would obviously get an Azure subscription. Go to azure.com, sign up for an Azure subscription, probably have it already as part of your enterprise. Maybe it's a trial, easy way to sign up and get an Azure subscription. The next thing you'll want to do is you get your ArcGIS server and software license. You will download that from Esri, just the way you do regularly. And the third step is you'll get the ArcGIS Server Cloud Builder. You download that from Esri. And with that, I'll just switch over to a quick demo. So I mentioned the 3 ways you can actually get started. So the first one is to get your licenses or to get Cloud Builder, you'd sign into your Esri, and you'll find links for whichever software version you're looking for. Alternatively, you can find it through our help documentation. And we also have links within our offer within the marketplace itself. So you can download Cloud Builder for there. So I've already gone ahead and downloaded Cloud Builder. It's a really easy to install, click once application. So I launched the application. It brings a dialog to sign in to Azure. I'm already signed in on this machine, so I'm going to pick the subscription that I'm working with. Click Next. The landing page is going to show you a bunch of your existing sites and your catalog of existing deployments. I'm going to start off by deploying a new site, and so you can see how the process works. So David and I spent a little bit of time talking about the base ArcGIS Enterprise Deployment, and that's typically what you'll want to get set up, get started with. So the first screen describes the different server roles and the purpose for which it is typically used. So we'll start off with the ArcGIS Enterprise or the base deployment. The first screen is going to ask you some Azure-specific questions. Azure is based on the concept of resource groups, which gives you the ability to group all your infrastructure resources into groups or conceptually folders and associate access rules with it. You have the ability to create resource groups within Cloud Builder or the ability to reuse your existing resource groups. I'm going to pick an Esri image, the latest one to use. I'm going to deploy, and I'm going to pick the region into which I'm going to deploy this. I'm going to set up this deployment. Alternatively, you can take the Esri image and customize it. A typical scenario would be adding some local data or installing an antivirus of your choice, and you can save that image in your subscription, and you can reference that as you're deploying in Cloud Builder. The next step I'm going to provide is the DNS name for the public IP that's associated with that external load balancer. As David mentioned, you have the ability to deploy everything on a single machine, or you can spread it out onto many machines. If this happens to be a dev test environment or prototyping, you're getting your feet wet, the single machine option is a good option to start with. The next screen is important, and if you remember, I talked about the license and the fact that the software actually needs the license to come to life. I'm going to actually browse out to my license on disk, provide that. Now it's going to ask you some more questions about needed for the deployment. Two of the credentials that are needed for the deployment is the ArcGIS Server Site Administrator, or the primary site administrator, as many of you refer to it. The ArcGIS Run as Windows account, so I'm going to provide credentials for that. Click Next. It's going to ask you for the administrator credentials for the virtual machines. I'm going to paste my password in so I don't fat finger it. It's going to allow you to pick a size for the virtual machine, set the time zone for the server, and then provide a name for the machine. I'll call it my Web GIS VM. I can choose to enable Windows updates on the machine and enable access to remote desktop, so I can remote desktop into the machine. It'll also let you, all machines within Azure need to live within a virtual network. So you have the ability to create a virtual network within Cloud Builder or reference an existing one and choose the subnet within which you'd like to place that machine. So this is needed for machines to be able to talk to each other. The next screen is going to ask you what kind of data stores would you like as part of this deployment. The options are, with the base deployment, you do get the relational. You can optionally enable the tile cache, which will store your tile cache for hosted scene layers. You can also enable the spatiotemporal data store type, which, as David explained earlier, archives real-time data from things like GeoEvent and GeoAnalytics. The next option is an SSL certificate. So we take sort of web security and SSL very important. We pay a lot of importance to it. So we encourage you to use a certificate from a certificate authority. But if this happens to be a dev test environment, you can choose to use the self-signed certificate option, in which Cloud Builder will automatically generate a certificate and use it for the web servers. The next screen shows a summary of the deployment. You can save that summary to a text file and save it for reference. This is always useful. You can review all of the deployment options, tweak anything that you need, and then click Finish. And what will happen is Cloud Builder will then go ahead and spin up the deployment, configure the ArcGIS components, and you'll have a ready working deployment. So that was your base ArcGIS deployment. So now let's talk about some of the others and what's the difference between those. Now let's assume I'm deploying a GeoEvent server. Everything remains the same. There's not much difference. The only difference you'll see is the only license you need to provide now is actually your GeoEvent license. So I'm going to actually browse out to a GeoEvent license before I proceed. Everything else remains the same. The one option that you do get is you do get to federate this server with your base deployment. I can choose the base deployment of Enterprise that I'm using. I can choose it. I can provide the portal site administrator credentials. I'll click Next. Optionally, you could stick with the standalone where it's not federated as well. So once the deployment completes, it will federate it with that portal, and the single sign-on experience and the authentication, all of that works seamlessly. Everything else remains the same. Now let's try one of the other servers. Let's try the image server, for instance. The difference here again, you will be providing a license to your image server. The one additional capability in the image server option while deploying is you can actually browse out to an Azure storage location to use for your, let me see if I have something here. I'm just going to pretend that this is the output location. So this is the output location for the raster data store. And so at the end of deployment, Cloud Builder will actually configure this. So as you run raster analysis, the output will actually live in this cloud storage location. So that's image server for you. Similarly, I'd like to show you GeoAnalytics. And when I show you GeoAnalytics, it probably doesn't make sense to show a single machine. We'd actually like to leverage many machines so we can actually distribute those analytics and that computation across all of those machines. Again, the only difference, I will be providing the GeoAnalytics license for this deployment. And you'll see a few, because I chose many machines and not one, you'll see a slightly different option here. You'll actually be given the option to specify names and sizes for the individual machines, or you can choose some default names that Cloud Builder picks. If I say I want to specify, you can actually determine how many machines you want and what's the size for them and the names that you want to provide for those machines. Another option I'd like to highlight is the optional ability to use the Azure Cloud Storage for the configuration store. Again, you can choose to use it and then pick the Azure storage account that you want to use to store the server's configuration store in that option. And then the last option I'd like to show you is the generic GIS server, if you will. The difference in this one is you actually have the ability to register or buddy this deployment up with a database. And out of the gate, we support Azure SQL Database, or SQL Azure, it was formerly known. Or you can choose SQL Server on a VM, in which case you can choose the SQL Server image to use and the size of the machine that you would like to use. If you happen to be just deploying, say, a server meant for just geocoding and you didn't need a database, you can choose the none option. So those were the different options within Cloud Builder for deploying things. And once you're deployed, you'll see a catalog of all your sites. You can easily access it here, log into it, and you're all set. Right? This actually happened to be a backup site for a demo used for portal and portal collaboration during the plenary. Once you're done deploying, there's some post-deployment options that are extremely useful. One is you can connect to your machine using remote desktop. So if I click it, it'll prompt with remote desktop. And I can sign in with the virtual machine administrator credentials, sign in. You can, after the fact, install an SSL CA-issued certificate. If this happens to be a GeoAnalytics, you can actually add spatiotemporal big data store machines to it. Actually, I take that back. If this happens to be your base enterprise deployment, you can add spatiotemporal big data store machines after the fact. Again, here you're required to provide credentials to your deployment. I can choose how many machines of the spatiotemporal I would like. Click Next, review my summary, and those machines will get provisioned, deployed, and buddied up with your deployment. If this happens to be just a generic server deployment and you actually wanted to add a database, you can actually do that after the fact as well. So you can choose the SQL database or SQL server, provide those options, provide the database administrator and the database user credentials, and have that provisioned as well. Okay. With that, I'll switch back to the slide. So not everybody's familiar with Cloud Builder, or some of you are, it might be your first time experience, but since we're technical folks, developers in the room, I figured I'd give you sort of an under the hood look at how Cloud Builder works, right? This is useful if you're troubleshooting something or actually want to understand what's happening under the hood. So Cloud Builder has two responsibilities. It provisions the infrastructure resources using the Azure API, the Azure Resource Manager API specifically. It uses a combination of declarative code and imperative code and declarative template logic to actually provision these resources. And then the second part is it'll actually trigger an in-VM configuration of the ArcGIS components. It does this using PowerShell desired state configuration, which is sort of Microsoft's pattern for automation. It uses the Azure custom script extension to actually trigger this execution. So the first thing Cloud Builder will do is, depending on all the options you chose, as you walk through all those different steps, depending on your site topology, was it a single machine, was it many machines, was it different tiers, it will actually provision those Azure infrastructure resources. And those include the virtual machines, the network interfaces for those virtual machines, the disks associated with those virtual machines. It'll put those machines in availability sets so you get high availability. It'll provision the load balancer and configure them appropriately such that traffic flows on the right ports. It'll put the machines in the right virtual network so that they talk to each other. So it'll do all this for you. The second thing it does, it'll actually stage the deployment artifacts. So as part of deployment, you provided things like your SSL certificate, you provided your license, and then Cloud Builder has some internal plumbing files that it uses to describe the deployment and actually achieve this configuration. So it uses a staging location in blob storage to actually house these artifacts. So once it stages that, it'll actually then trigger a script execution on the file share machine. And what happens, so again, this script execution is a Microsoft extension called custom script. And what happens is it'll download those artifacts and then begin executing those on the machine. If you're curious to know where that executes, it executes on the machine on C drive under the packages folder. And it writes out logs to the ArcGIS deploy directory. At this point, actually, Cloud Builder is technically done. All of the heavy lifting is now left to the script extension. So that's the part where the script is going in and configuring the firewall correctly, making sure the right firewall ports are open, the Windows accounts are created, the ArcGIS server site is set up at the correct location. So all the heavy lifting is done by the script. Cloud Builder essentially at that point waits for the script execution to complete, at which time it downloads the log file, which can be used for troubleshooting if you had any issues. It downloads it to the temp folder on the Cloud Builder machine. So once the deployment completes, the script uploads a log file which Cloud Builder retrieves. So this is useful information to have. Sometimes your deployments fail, and ideally we don't like this to happen, but if it does, here's some tips and tricks to be able to troubleshoot that. First thing you'll want to do is you'll want to examine your log file for errors. So the Cloud Builder generates two log files. One is a local file, which is what a log of what Cloud Builder does, and then a remote log, which is what executes on the virtual machine. During some of our earlier releases, we had some bugs in deployment where if you didn't provide a strong enough password for your Windows credentials, your deployments would fail. That's just because of Windows' strong password requirements. So we found this out through experience, and we fixed those bugs. Sometimes it helps to try the defaults. Maybe you're trying a configuration that has potentially hit a bug. So we recommend, if you've had a failed deployment, try with the smaller deployment or try with the defaults and see if there's a difference between that. If it still does not work, encourage you to submit a support incident so we're actually able to fix the issue, improve the software. And typically when you're submitting a support incident, they will ask you for your log files and your deployment summary. With that, I'd like to sort of wet your whistle and get you excited about some of the things that are coming soon in 10.5.1. And I think it's really important. Some of the new features is we now support Windows Server 2016. So the images that we supply will have Windows Server 2016. It'll take advantage of some Azure native features, primarily Azure Blob Storage for storing portal content, and then also as input for as a big data file share for GeoAnalytics. Along the lines for Azure native features, we're integrating with Azure Key Vault and also supporting managed disks. This is a key feature that I'll highlight in a moment. In terms of new workflows that we're supporting is the ability to manage sites in a machine. So we want to take advantage of the elasticity of the cloud and the ability to easily provision machines. So you'll have the ability to add and remove machines from a site. You'll have the ability to start, stop, and delete machines. And you can actually also elastically scale your machine size. This is typically helpful when you're not sure about your workload and the requirements for the machine. You can now take advantage of the elasticity of cloud and Azure to be able to scale those machines up. One of the key improvements in Azure that's happened recently is the support for managed disks, and I'd like to spend a minute to highlight what that is. So for those of you long in the tooth or like gamers or who are passionate about putting PCs together, you're typically aware of an anatomy of a machine, right? So there's typically a CPU, potentially a GPU associated with it, there's memory, there's disks. It's not very different when you consider virtual machines or virtual machines in the cloud. Again, there's CPUs, there's memory, there's network interfaces, and you have some disks associated with it, potentially a GPU. Previously on Azure, what was known as unmanaged disks is you actually had to manage these disks yourselves. So even though this is a sort of a physical view of Azure's infrastructure when you put in availability sets. So your computation tier could actually be highly available, but your storage, which was actually maps to what is known as fault domains, you actually had to manage that yourselves. So you had to put your disks into a particular storage account and manage that yourself. So this is sort of a major pain point because then you have a single point of failure and you have potentially issues there in terms of high availability. But in terms of a logical view, those disks actually live in the storage account, and so you have to actually manage those disks in those storage accounts. There's potential for hitting resource limits on a single storage account, so it didn't make for a very good experience. So managed disks solves that problem. So managed disks actually separates out your storage and compute tiers into different fault domains. So that way you have both your high availability, you don't have issues with scalable targets, you can actually scale up your disk throughput, and you can achieve sort of elasticity in the cloud that you'd expect. Another thing that's, Azure and the cloud is innovating at a really fast pace, and they're constantly adding new virtual machine sizes. So earlier, Cloud Builder had a configuration file which stored all of these machine sizes. That would quickly get out of date, and we'd have a hard time keeping up. So this was just some of the sizes that were added in the last 6 months, and you had a set of options depending on price to size that you desire for being able to scale up. So they're constantly adding sizes. And there's actually plans to add more. So over the next 6 months, they've already exposed in sort of private fashion many different VM sizes that are appropriate for different workloads. And this is expected to grow, just given the fast pace of the cloud. So there's lots of different sizes for VMs and lots of different options. Another issue with the cloud is some of these sizes vary by region. So this is sort of a matrix view of some of these different sizes that are available just in these regions. And so sometimes we'd have customers reporting failures in deployments because the size that they were trying to deploy didn't actually work. So the configuration-based retrieval of file sizes was not really working out for Cloud Builder. So what we've done at 10.5.1 is we've actually made the machine sizes configurable and retrieved through the API. And you actually have the ability to pick those sizes and the associated disks with it. So starting at 10.5.1, Cloud Builder will use managed disks exclusively. And you also have the ability to provision what type of disk you want associated with it, the size of it. Do you want solid-state drives, which provide more IOPS? Or would you like magnetic drives, also known as HDD, for your machines? The machine types are retrieved from the API, so you can be certain that the machine sizes that are available in the region is indeed available for your use. The other integration feature that we're highlighting is the Azure Key Vault, and we're going to be using this as a secure store for SSL certificates. So the Key Vault is a safe place for safeguarding your keys, your secrets, and certificates. And at 10.5.1, we will be using that as an optional place to store your certificate, your SSL certificate. Another nice thing about the Azure Key Vault is they have integration with existing certificate authorities or CA providers. Out of the gate, they have support for DigiCert, GlobalSign, WoSign, and a few others. So they actually have native integration where certificates that you provision through, say, DigiCert will automatically show up in your Azure Key Vault. You'll also be notified if there's expiration. The certificates get updated automatically. So we're trying to enable that integration as well. Within Cloud Builder, you can upload this like a certificate that you have on disks right into Key Vault as well. So that workflow is covered. And with that, I'll just do a quick demo of the 10.5.1 features. So let's go to 10.5.1. I'm going to sign into my Azure subscription. I'm going to pick my subscription. I'm going to highlight some of the changes that we see. The first one, you will see that as opposed to asking you the storage account in which your unmanaged disk would live, you now actually just pick the region in which makes more sense. You can also now take managed disks and create an image out of it, and so we'll show you the image within your Azure subscription. Demo, call this. Next. Nothing else has changed with this workflow, so bear with me as I key through this. The change I'd like to highlight is now in terms of configuration of machines, you can actually dynamically get the set of machine sizes that are available in this region. You can choose what type of disk you'd like to use, a solid state drive or a magnetic disk drive. You can choose to add an empty data disk to this machine and the size of that machine based on supported sizes in that region. You can choose the size of your operating system disk and the size of your data disk as well. And so now you can choose that. So that's managed disk for you. And then next, I'd like to show you the key vault integration. So, right. So the key vault integration allows you to specify a key vault to use for your deployment. Again, you can provision key vaults within the deployment or use an existing one. You can choose to save your certificates in the key vault. You can choose to save your credentials. Those were the machine credentials. And then you can choose also to save your ArcGIS license as an artifact in that key vault. Once I choose that option, I can actually, when I'm specifying it, I can say I can provide my certificate from a file on disk, or I can specify one of the key vaults in my account. So it's been a little slow here, but it should show my key vault secrets in here. Seem to be having some network issues, but I'll come back to it. The last thing I'd like to showcase, the last one I'd like to showcase is GeoAnalytics, the portal content. So if I were deploying a GeoAnalytics server, you'll now be given the option to browse to cloud storage to be used as registered for your input big data stores. So similar to how you were able to register a cloud storage location for raster output, you can now browse to a blob container which has your data input for use as input for your big data file shares. Okay. I know we're running short on time, so I'll try and speed up at this point. And sort of to really get you excited about some of the stuff that's cooking, again, a quick disclaimer, this is sort of sneak peek, this kind of subject to change for sure. One of the reasons we're looking at using things like the key vault and integration is actually to power an auto-scaling scenario where there's no human intervention or manually scaling machines. You actually want to be able to scale those machines automatically. We're also planning to add support for Azure SQL Database for PostgreSQL. This is in preview today. So as things reach GA and we're able to test and build out this tooling experience, we'll actually be able to support that workflow as well. We're also excited and we're working closely in trying to bring Workstation GIS to Azure and to leverage the GPU-backed virtual machines and be able to deploy ArcGIS Desktop, which includes all the components of Pro and ArcMap and Catalog on these machines. I'd like to do a quick sneak peek of that. Actually, before that, I do want to highlight a couple of the other workflow experiences I mentioned, which is the ability to add machines to your site, right? So after I'm done deploying, I can actually now add machines to that site. And I can choose to add machines to different tiers within that. I can choose to add servers to my hosting server. I can choose to add to my portal, or I can add to the front-end reverse proxy tier. Again, I would choose the number of machines that I would like, choose the size that I would like to those machines, provide the machine administrator credentials, and hit go. Just review your summary again. You're all set to go. Your certificate. And in terms of being able to manage machines, right? I mentioned this at the start. So you've already deployed some machines. You were able to add machines to it. You can now sort of start, stop, terminate, delete those machines. You can take advantage of the elasticity and change the machine size, which will restart the machine. So this will be really helpful for being able to sort of, as your workload grows or changes, you can leverage the sort of the vertical scalability of the cloud and scale your machines. If you're not using a machine, you can choose to delete it or stop it. So that was some 10.5.1 features that are coming soon. I'd like to do a quick sneak peek of some 10.6 features that we're working on to get you excited. Gonna sign in. The big difference you can actually now see is you're actually able to now either deploy sites or workstations. A workstation is essentially you can choose the components for your workstation. You can choose to have it run. You can choose to enable Pro or ArcMap or Catalog on this machine. And the rest of the experience is sort of similar. You walk through and specify details about your virtual network and how you'd like to access it. What kind of machine do you want to use? A GPU-backed machine or how many disks do you want to attach? And you hit go, and at the end of 20, 30 minutes, you'll have a workstation with the ArcGIS desktop components running on there. And with that, sort of end, I'd like to use this opportunity. We always love your feedback, and we'd like to learn more from you in terms of your wish list. What's high on your wish list in terms of priorities, both from an IT perspective, deployment. Is it so we can prioritize and build that for you? Some of the areas of feedback we've gotten in the past is setting up the virtual machines for backup, integrating with the Azure recovery services, potentially with, say, OMS, or automating in-place upgrades, configuring network security groups, Linux support, or Azure Active Directory. These are some of the feedback we've received through email. But yeah, I'd like to use this opportunity to solicit that feedback. We're always open to this feedback, and we're also looking for people who have interesting workloads and things that they'd like to showcase at our user conference. So feel free to reach out to me or David with this. And with that, I'll open up for question and answers. Go ahead.
The image server role, I think, is the ArcGIS Enterprise. If you said it didn't make sense to even deploy that unless you were going to split the load up across more than one machine. So that sounds to me like more than one license that I'm not going to use all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the recommendation for licensing versus when I actually use the license?
David, do you want to take that? So, yeah, of course.
So the question. Sorry. I think the gist of the question is, on the image server role, we have it split out on a separate machine. And you said it may not have, we expressed kind of, it may not make sense unless you have multiple machines on it. What is the thinking in terms of you might not use that or use it all the time? I think there's two aspects to it. I wouldn't necessarily say you always need a second machine. The point is it's for multi-threaded processing. So, and there's two approaches you can go. You can go with a really big machine that has lots of CPUs, or you can split across smaller machines with less CPUs. And on the cloud, it's really easy to do either because you have so much flexibility with your infrastructure. And you're right. A lot of times you might do your image processing a few times a month, or instead of every day. And how do you do that? Well, that's the perfect scenario for the cloud because you can scale up and down. If it's a licensing aspect, that I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. Our product manager, who handles most of that business stuff, was here earlier. If you come up to the front, if he's still here, he can come up and he can talk to you about that. Yeah, you want to pick up?
Could you speak up? I didn't quite catch the question.
So I can address that.
Yeah.
I mean, the pay-as-you-go on Amazon is right now just available for the workgroup level of ArcGIS Server, which is essentially the database. I think it's fair to say at this point this is an experimental model for Esri, and we're evaluating whether we go with a pay-as-you-go model in the future. At this point, we can't make a commitment saying in the future we'll have it either on Amazon for more stuff, like the enterprise level of stuff, or on Azure. It's something we're evaluating and we're experimenting with. So.
Yeah.
Upgrading from a version, ArcGIS version to another one, maybe from 10.5 to 10.1.
Yeah, so the question was upgrading from a particular version of the software, and can we automate that? So we hear that feedback a lot, and so that was on the feedback and wish list, and so that is an area we're looking to invest and build out for you. The ability to automate that upgrade. Today it is a manual process. Question.
Cloud Builder seems like a great option. Does it have a command line interface that will take configuration part? Can it be scripted, automated?
So if I heard the question right, it is how can I? So Cloud Builder is a GUI and has a a click experience. How can I actually automate something like this? All right. And so one of the options today, and we're still open to feedback on this, is you can actually leverage. So a Cloud Builder is built on automation. So as I mentioned, under the hood, it does the two things, right? Provisioning infrastructure and then doing the configuration. So today you can actually go to one of your resource groups. Oops, sorry, can you stop?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so if you actually go to, let's say you take a Cloud Builder deployment, and actually go to the resource group under which you can actually, Azure will actually provide the ability to take this infrastructure template and parameterize it, and then save this out as a template, and then actually provide sort of some code snippets in which you can actually automate this, say PowerShell or .NET.
Maybe over there.
I assume this all get more fine with the wildcard certificate.
Yes, go ahead.
Like for the certificate setup and everything, is a wildcard certificate going to be fine?
There's a question, can you use a wildcard certificate?
Yeah.
Yes, you can use a wildcard certificate. Just during Cloud Builder, you need to specify the actual alias or domain name for this particular deployment. But yes, Cloud Builder does support wildcard certificates to be installed on this.
Do you need to do anything special for the domain or set up Azure or that?
Yes, you do. The way SSL certificates work with the cloud in general is the certificate is issued to your domain, and then you need to set up a CNAME mapping at the DNS level between that CNAME alias and the cloud deployment. So you would need to manage that DNS yourself today. Question?
Yeah, is there any plan to support the Linux security
Did you catch that, David? I didn't catch that. Could you?
The question is whether there will be a Linux supported version of
A Linux version of Cloud Builder.
Oh, so a Linux version of Cloud Builder? I think. Right. Right. So yeah, right now we don't have any plans for that. We have existing investments in the WPF app for it. But I guess one of the options you could look at is the automation option, or potentially running Cloud Builder on a Windows-only machine. So right now we don't have any plans for a Mac or a Linux client. Oh, okay. Okay. So the question was support for Linux deployments. So is that primarily for familiarity with Linux in your enterprise? Yeah, that's good feedback. So that we'll definitely take that back and prioritize and see. So we're always constantly looking for feedback and evaluating, the set of Linux users versus the Windows users. So that's good feedback. Thank you.
Okay, and maybe one last question over there.
So the ability to generate a certificate using, pardon me? Let's Encrypt. So actually actually tried Let's Encrypt. It doesn't work for the Azure domain because there's actually so many deployments that use the cloudapp.azure.com domain. So Let's Encrypt actually doesn't work with that. But there is, like I mentioned, there's a good integration experience now with the CA certificates and the Azure Key Vault. So I would encourage you to look in that direction. And is your domain the Cloud App Azure domain, or is it your own custom domain? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we could take this discussion offline. So in the interest of time, I'd like to stop for Q&A here, but we're available at the server island. We can take some questions more here after this. I have some business cards here, so feel free to reach out via email. And
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.